Imagine you are standing at an airport immigration desk. You have traveled this route dozens of times. You know the process. You hand over your passport, you answer the standard questions, you collect your stamp and walk through. It is routine. It is ordinary. You have done it so many times that you barely think about it anymore. The officer looks at your passport. He looks at you. He looks at the passport again. He calls a colleague over. They speak quietly. Another officer arrives. Then another. You are not alarmed. Not yet. You have done nothing wrong. Your documents are in order. Your passport is legitimate. It is full of entry stamps from countries around the world, including this one, because you have been here before, many times, for business. And then the officer looks at you with an expression you cannot quite read and says, "The country in your passport does not exist." You stare at him. You tell him that is impossible. You were born there. You have lived there your entire life. You have traveled on this passport for years. The country is right there, on the border between France and Spain, where it has always been, where it has been for as long as anyone can remember. The officer turns a map toward you and points. The place where your country should be is occupied by a small nation called Andorra. You have never heard of Andorra. This is the story of the man from Taured. A story that has circulated for decades, that has been told and retold in books about the paranormal, in documentaries about parallel universes, in late-night conversations about the nature of reality. A story that raises questions that cannot be easily answered, about identity, about the structure of the world, and about what it would actually mean if someone arrived here from somewhere else. A story that may not have happened at all, and yet, a story that will not go away. This is the full story of the man from Taured. The legend, the investigation, and the ideas it leaves behind. Let us begin with the story itself, the version that has been circulating since at least the 1980s, repeated in books, magazines, websites, and documentaries. The version that most people encounter when they first hear about the man from Taured. The year, depending on which account you read, is either 1954 or sometime in the early 1960s. The location is Tokyo International Airport, known today as Haneda Airport, in Japan. Japan is in the early stages of its post-war economic recovery, and international business travel through Tokyo is increasing as the country reconnects with global trade networks. A man arrives on an international flight. He is well-dressed. He is calm and confident. He speaks multiple languages fluently, Japanese, French, and possibly others, depending on the version of the story. He is, by all appearances, an experienced international traveler, the kind of man who moves through airports with the ease of someone who has done it many times before. He approaches the immigration desk and presents his passport. The passport is real, or at least, it looks completely real. It is a proper travel document, with a photograph, official stamps, and the accumulated entry visas of a person who travels regularly for business. It shows previous visits to Japan. It shows travel throughout Europe and Asia. The country listed on the passport is Taured. The immigration officer does not recognize this country. He consults a colleague. Neither of them has ever heard of Taured. They produce a map and ask the man to show them where his country is located. He points without hesitation to the small mountainous region on the border between France and Spain, the region occupied, in our world, by the Principality of Andorra. He is not confused or uncertain. He is matter of fact. Taured is there. It has always been there. He cannot understand why they are asking him this. The officers tell him that region is called Andorra, a small principality that has existed in that location for centuries. He has never heard of Andorra. He insists, with complete conviction, that the region is called Taured, that it is his home country, and that he has been traveling on this passport without difficulty for years. The immigration authorities detain him for questioning. What follows, in the standard telling of the story, is a deepening series of impossibilities. The company he claims to be visiting in Tokyo, the Japanese firm he says he has been doing business with for years, has no record of him. His name means nothing to them. There is no scheduled meeting, no prior business relationship, nothing. The hotel where he claims to have a reservation, a specific hotel in Tokyo where he says he has stayed before on previous business trips, has no record of his booking. His name is not in their system. His wallet contains currency from multiple countries, all of it real, all of it valid, all of it consistent with the currency of the early 1950s or 1960s. Except that some of the bills are subtly wrong, the designs slightly different from the officially issued versions, as if printed by a parallel mint that got most of the details right, but not quite all of them. His bank documents reference financial institutions that investigators cannot locate. Not closed banks, not obscure regional banks, simply institutions that do not appear to exist in any directory or record. Everything about him is consistent. Everything about him is coherent. He is not behaving like a fraud or a confused person. He answers questions directly, with the irritation of a businessman whose time is being wasted by an administrative error he cannot account for. The authorities are at a loss. They place him in a room in a nearby hotel, some versions say under guard, with security personnel stationed outside the door and possibly outside the window as well. They intend to continue the investigation the following morning and determine what to do with him. In the morning, he is gone. The room was watched. The door was monitored. The window, depending on the version, was either locked from the inside or several floors above the ground. His documents, the passport, the business papers, the currency, have vanished with him. He is never seen again. No follow-up investigation produces any result. No country called Taured is ever found. No record of the man, his company, or his hotel reservation is ever located. He came from somewhere. He went back to it. And the world he arrived in had no place for him and kept no memory of him, except the story. That is the legend of the man from Taured. Now let us do something that the legend rarely invites us to do. Let us look at it carefully. Because the story of the man from Taured is not like the story of Julian Coepque or Hiro Onoda or the Somerton man. Those stories are documented. There are police records, newspaper accounts, hospital records, photographs, living witnesses. They happened, and the evidence of their happening is preserved in the world. The man from Taured is different. When researchers and journalists have gone looking for the original source of this story, the news report, the airport record, the immigration document, the contemporary account that would anchor the event in history, they find almost nothing. The earliest known published reference to the story appears to be a 1981 book called The Directory of Possibilities, edited by Colin Wilson and John Grant, a collection of paranormal and unexplained phenomena. The story appears there, briefly, as a known case. But no primary source is cited. No newspaper is referenced. No date is pinned down precisely. From there, the story spread. Other paranormal books picked it up. It appeared in magazines dedicated to the unexplained. It circulated through early internet forums in the 1990s and then exploded across social media in the 2010s, accumulating details and variations with each retelling. Each version is slightly different. In some, it is 1954. In others, it is 1962. In some, the man is European. In others, his nationality is ambiguous. In some versions, the hotel window was locked from the inside. In others, he was on a high floor. The currency detail appears in some versions and not others. The company he was visiting is sometimes named, sometimes not. This is the pattern of legend, not of documented history. Stories that are based on real events tend to be more consistent in their core details and less consistent in their peripheral ones, because witnesses remember the important things and forget the minor ones. Stories that are invented or embellished tend to accumulate details over time, becoming more elaborate and more specific with each retelling. as each storyteller adds the convincing particulars that make a tale feel real. The man from Taured has no verifiable witnesses. No one has come forward to say, "I was the immigration officer that day. I was the hotel security guard. I was the colleague who was called over to look at the passport." Tokyo International Airport in the 1950s and 1960s was a busy, bureaucratic institution with extensive record-keeping. Unusual immigration incidents, and a man presenting a passport from a non-existent country would certainly qualify as unusual, would have generated paperwork. That paperwork would, in all likelihood, still exist somewhere in the archives of the Japanese immigration authorities. No such record has ever been produced. Japan has a robust investigative journalism tradition and a culture of meticulous record-keeping. The story of a man who appeared from a parallel universe and then vanished from a guarded hotel room would, if it had actually happened, almost certainly have been reported in Japanese newspapers at the time. No such contemporary report has been found. This does not mean the story is false. Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Records are lost. Events go unreported. Bureaucracies keep secrets. It is theoretically possible that this happened and that all evidence of it was suppressed, lost, or never created. But the more parsimonious explanation, the simpler explanation that requires fewer assumptions, is that the story is a legend, that it began as a piece of creative speculation, or a misremembered or embellished account of something more mundane, and grew through repetition into the elaborate, specific, emotionally compelling narrative it is today. And here is where the story gets philosophically interesting. Because whether or not it happened, the story means something. It has persisted and spread and resonated with millions of people for decades. It keeps being told. It keeps capturing imaginations. It keeps generating conversation and speculation. Why? What is it about the man from Taured that refuses to let go? Before we get to the deeper questions the story raises, let us spend a moment on the geography, because it is one of the most intriguing details in the legend, and it rewards close attention. In our world, the small territory on the border between France and Spain is called Andorra. It is one of the smallest countries in the world, a landlocked microstate of roughly 468 square kilometers, nestled in the eastern Pyrenees Mountains. It has a population of about 77,000 people. It has been an independent principality since the 13th century, governed jointly by the French Republic and the Bishop of Urgell in Spain. It is, in its way, a genuinely peculiar little nation, a medieval co-principality that survived into the modern world more or less by being too small and too inconvenient to bother absorbing. It has its own culture, its own language, Catalan, and its own distinct identity. In the Man from Taured story, the country that occupies this same geographical space is called Taured. The man from that country considers it his normal, obvious homeland. He finds it as self-evident as we find Andorra, or rather, he finds it as self-evident as Andorra's 77,000 inhabitants find it. This detail is part of what makes the story feel plausible to those who believe it. It is not a dramatic impossibility, not a case of a man claiming to come from a continent that doesn't exist or a planet in another solar system. It is the smallest possible divergence, the same piece of land, with a different name, governed perhaps slightly differently, with a slightly different history. The implication, and this is what makes the parallel universe interpretation so compelling, is that somewhere there is a timeline almost exactly like ours, in which the medieval history of that Pyrenean territory went slightly differently. A different treaty, a different name, a different outcome to some long-forgotten political negotiation. And the result, centuries later, is a country called Taured instead of Andorra. Everything else might be essentially the same. The same world wars, the same post-war recovery, the same Tokyo airport. Just Taured where Andorra should be. It is the minimum possible alteration. A world that is 99.999% identical to ours, different in one small geographical political detail. And a man from that world, arriving in this one, would be exactly as the story describes, completely coherent, completely convinced, completely unable to understand why no one recognizes his country. Whether or not the story is true, this is a beautifully constructed thought experiment, and it leads directly into the science. Let us take the man from Taured seriously for a moment, not as a documented historical event, but as a hypothesis. If someone could arrive from a parallel timeline, what would the physics actually say? The concept of parallel universes, sometimes called the multiverse, is not purely the domain of science fiction and paranormal speculation. It is a legitimate area of theoretical physics, discussed seriously by some of the most respected scientists in the world. It emerges, somewhat surprisingly, from the mathematics of quantum mechanics. Here is the basic idea. Quantum mechanics, the physics that describes the behavior of matter and energy at the smallest scales, tells us that particles do not have definite properties until they are measured. Before measurement, a particle exists in what physicists call a superposition, a combination of all its possible states simultaneously. When measured, it appears to collapse into one definite state. This is strange enough, but the interpretation of what is actually happening during that collapse is one of the most debated questions in all of physics. The most widely taught interpretation, the Copenhagen interpretation, essentially says, the wave function collapses because it is measured, and we should not ask what was happening before measurement, because that question has no meaningful answer. But in 1957, a Princeton physicist named Hugh Everett III proposed a radically different interpretation. In Everett's model, now called the many worlds interpretation, the wave function does not collapse at all. Instead, every possible outcome of every quantum event actually occurs. The universe branches. In one branch, the particle went left. In another branch, it went right. Both branches are equally real. Both continue to exist. Applied at the scale of the entire universe, over billions of years of quantum events, this produces an unimaginably vast number of parallel branches, each one a complete universe, identical to ours up to some branching point and then diverging from there. In some branches, the divergence is at the quantum level. A subatomic event went differently, and the resulting universe is essentially identical to ours for all practical purposes. In others, the divergence cascades upward over time, producing macroscopically different worlds. A world where the medieval principality of Andorra was named Taured instead is not, in this framework, inconceivable. It would be a branch that diverged from ours at some historical moment, a different treaty, a different naming decision, and then ran parallel to ours, producing a world that was almost but not quite identical. The many worlds interpretation is genuinely controversial among physicists. Many accept it as the most mathematically natural reading of quantum mechanics. Others find it philosophically extravagant. The idea of an infinite number of equally real universes existing in parallel strikes them as an enormous ontological cost for a modest explanatory benefit. The debate is ongoing and unresolved. But here is the crucial point. Even physicists who accept the many worlds interpretation do not believe that travel between branches is possible. In Everett's framework, the branches are real, but they are causally isolated from each other. There is no mechanism, no wormhole, no quantum tunnel, no theoretical process of any kind by which a person or object could cross from one branch to another. The branches diverge and never reconverge. They do not intersect. They cannot be visited. So even if we accept, fully and completely, the theoretical framework that makes parallel universes most plausible, we still have no mechanism for the man from Taured to have arrived where he did. There are other theoretical frameworks that are sometimes invoked in these discussions. String theory, in some of its formulations, predicts the existence of extra spatial dimensions and potentially of other universes in a higher dimensional space. Some cosmological models propose a landscape of bubble universes, each with different physical constants, inflating and expanding in a larger metaverse. These ideas are mathematically sophisticated and scientifically serious. None of them provide a mechanism for a businessman to step off a plane in Tokyo in 1954. This does not mean it is impossible. It means we have no physics for it. And in the absence of physics, we are in the domain of either miracle or story. The Man from Taured is not the only story of its kind. And looking at the company it keeps tells us something important about what kind of story it is. There is a category of paranormal accounts sometimes called phantom travelers, people who appear somewhere they shouldn't be, with credentials that don't quite fit the world they've arrived in, and then disappear without explanation. These stories appear across cultures and across centuries, and they share a recognizable structure. In 2008, a story circulated widely online about a man who arrived at a Spanish airport claiming to be from a country called Uramba, which he said was in Africa. No such country existed. He disappeared from custody. The story spread across paranormal websites as a companion piece to The Man from Taured. It is almost certainly not true. No Spanish airport authority has confirmed it. No news report from the time has been found. It has the same evidentiary profile as Taured, which is to say, no verifiable evidence at all. There is the case of Jafar Vorin, supposedly a man who appeared in Frankfurt, Germany in 1851, claiming to be from a country called Loxaria in a part of the world called Sacria, neither of which existed in any atlas. This story has slightly better historical grounding. It appears in a German scientific journal from the period, though the explanation at the time was that he was simply a confused or mentally ill individual, possibly speaking a constructed or regional language that investigators misidentified as a foreign tongue. There are stories from Japan itself. The concept of Kakuryō, the hidden world, which in Japanese folklore exists alongside the ordinary world, accessible through certain places and moments, populated by beings who are not quite of this reality. There are medieval European accounts of people who claim to come from underground kingdoms, from islands that appeared and disappeared, from lands that no map could find. The Green Children of Woolpit, a 12th century English account of two children found in a field, speaking an unknown language, with green-tinted skin, who claim to come from a land called St. Martin's Land where the sun never shone, is perhaps the most famous of these. What these stories share is not evidence of parallel universes. What they share is a structure, the structure of the story about the person who comes from somewhere else, the visitor from another world, the traveler who crosses a boundary that ordinary people cannot cross. This structure is ancient. It appears in mythology, in folklore, in religious narrative, in literature. It is one of the fundamental story shapes that human cultures reach for when they want to explore certain questions. What is beyond the edge of the known world? Are there other ways of being human? What would it mean if the world we know is not the only world? The Man from Taured is a modern version of this ancient story shape. It is told in the language of airports and immigration forms and hotel reservations instead of enchanted forests and hidden kingdoms, but it is the same deep structure, updated for the 20th century. This does not make it less interesting. If anything, it makes it more interesting, because the fact that human beings keep telling this story in every culture and every era suggests that the story is doing something important. It is carrying a question that we have not finished asking. So if the Man from Taured is most likely a legend rather than a documented event, what is it doing? Why does it persist? Why does it resonate? Let us think about what the story actually feels like from the inside. You arrive somewhere you have been before. The physical world around you is familiar, the airport, the city, the language. But the social world does not recognize you. The company you work for has no record of you. The hotel where you have a reservation has no booking. The country on your passport does not exist in the maps of this world. You are not a criminal. You are not lying. You are not confused. You know who you are. You know where you come from. You have evidence, a passport, business documents, currency. Everything about your internal experience is consistent and coherent. But the world disagrees. This is a very specific kind of horror, not the horror of monsters or violence or death. The horror of being real and being unrecognized, of existing in a world that has no category for you, of having an identity that is completely genuine and completely invisible at the same time. Most of us have felt something like this, in smaller doses, at various points in our lives. The feeling of being in a room where the social codes are different and you do not know the rules. The feeling of coming from a background or a culture or a set of experiences that the people around you simply do not have a frame for. The feeling of saying something true about yourself and having it met with blankness or disbelief. The man from Taured is an extreme, crystalline version of that experience. He is perfectly coherent and perfectly unplaceable. He exists, fully, in a world that cannot contain him. And then he disappears. This is the other emotionally resonant element of the story. He does not fight. He does not break down. He does not demand justice or explanation. He is there, and then he is not. He goes back to wherever he came from, or goes nowhere, dissolves into the impossibility of his own existence, and leaves no trace. There is something both terrible and oddly peaceful about that ending. He was here. The world could not accommodate him. He left. The story also carries a quieter philosophical suggestion that the world we live in, the maps we rely on, the categories we use to organize reality, are not the only possible world, the only possible maps, the only possible categories. That the normal is not the necessary. That somewhere, perhaps, things are slightly different. That the border between France and Spain contains a country called Taured, and someone who lives there is as certain of that fact as you are certain of Andorra. This is, in its way, a deeply humanizing idea. The man from Taured is not a monster or an anomaly. He is a businessman. He has a job, a company, a hotel preference, a passport full of ordinary stamps. He is completely normal in his world. The strangeness is entirely in the gap between his world and ours. And the gap is so small. Just one name, in one small mountain principality. Everything else is the same. We have now come a long way from the immigration desk at Tokyo Airport. We have looked at the story as it is told, examined the evidence for its historical reality, considered the physics of parallel universes, traced the lineage of similar stories across cultures and centuries, and thought about what the story means emotionally and philosophically. What do we conclude? The honest answer is that the man from Taured almost certainly did not happen in the literal sense. There is no verified evidence that a man arrived at Tokyo Airport with a passport from a country called Taured. No airport record, no news report, no witness account, no document of any kind that predates the 1981 book where the story first clearly appears in print. The most likely explanation is that the story is a legend, possibly inspired by a real, but much more mundane event, possibly invented whole cloth by someone with a gift for a certain kind of uncanny narrative, and then spread and elaborated over decades until it acquired the weight and detail of something that really happened. But here's the thing about legends. They are not lies. They are not simply false. They are a different category of truth. A legend persists because it carries something real, not a real event, but a real question, a real anxiety, a real aspect of human experience that the story expresses in a way that is more powerful than a factual account could manage. The man from Taured carries a question that is genuinely unresolved, not just philosophically, but personally, for many people. The question of what it means to come from somewhere that the mainstream world does not recognize. The question of whether the categories we use to organize identity and belonging are the only possible categories. The question of whether there are other ways the world could have been arranged, other histories, other maps, other names for the same piece of mountain between France and Spain. And underneath all of that, the oldest question of all, are we alone in our version of reality? Is there something else, somewhere else, some other way of being that we cannot see from where we stand? The man from Taured does not answer that question. No story can. But it holds the question open in a particular way, with the specific, mundane, heartbreaking image of a man at an immigration desk, pointing to a map and saying, "It is right there. It has always been there." And the officer looking at the map and seeing nothing. Somewhere in the eastern Pyrenees Mountains, between France and Spain, there is a small territory called Andorra. It is real. It has a capital city, Andorra la Vella. It has a flag, blue and yellow and red, with a coat of arms in the center. It has ski resorts and duty-free shops and a population of 77,000 people who are perfectly certain of where they live and what their country is called. In another version of the world, a version that may exist in some branch of quantum possibility or may exist only in the space of stories, the same mountains contain a country called Taured, and its citizens are equally certain of their home. The man who arrived at Tokyo Airport in 1954 or thereabouts, or perhaps never at all, pointed to those mountains on a map with complete confidence. He was not performing. He was not lying. He was a man who knew where he was from and could not understand why the world disagreed. We do not know his name. We do not know what happened to him in the hours between when he was placed in that hotel room and when he was gone. We do not know if he made it back to Taured, or if Taured made it back to him, or if there is any making it back at all from the place where the maps run out. What we know is that the story has been told and retold and will be told again, that it has survived decades of skepticism and investigation and has emerged, not disproved exactly, but transformed from a claim about a real event into something that might be more durable than a real event. A myth, a question in narrative form, a small, persistent mystery at the edge of the map. In cartography, the old maps used to mark unexplored territories with the phrase, "Here be dragons." It was not a literal claim. It was an acknowledgement. There is something beyond this border that we do not understand. We have not been there. We cannot tell you what it contains. The man from Taured lives in that territory, beyond the verified, beyond the documented, in the space where the map runs out and the imagination takes over. And in that space, somewhere between France and Spain, a country called Taured is perfectly real. A businessman is packing his bag for a trip to Tokyo. He has been there many times before. He knows the way. Thank you for watching. The Man from Taured is one of those stories that I find more interesting the more honestly you look at it, not less. The legend might be more fascinating than the event, if the event ever happened at all. Let me know in the comments. Do you think he was real? A parallel universe traveler? A fraud? A confused man? Or something else entirely? Subscribe for the next story. And if you enjoyed this one, share it. Let someone else fall down this rabbit hole.